Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 25, 2023 Budget Committee meeting. Gary Schmidt, would you please take the roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair Smith. So we'll start with roll, and I'll just call on your name. I'll rotate between the county commissioners and the 5 public members of the Budget Committee. There are 10 of you, and we have some folks on Zoom. So we'll start with those in the room. Chair Smith.
Aye. Here.
Mr. Rhodes.
Present.
Commissioner Shull.
Here.
Mr., oh my gosh, Jamie, your last name, I'm so sorry.
Karn.
Or Mr. Karn, I'm sorry, Mr. Karn.
Here.
Mr. Cernak.
Present.
Commissioner West.
Present.
Ms. Parks.
Present.
Online, Ms. Lee.
Present.
And is there anyone else online, Tony? All right. And then our staff support today, Elizabeth, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning. I'm Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director for the county.
And Sandra?
Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager.
Tony?
Tony Mernick, Clerk to the Board.
I'm Gary Schmidt, the County Administrator, and I'm your Budget Officer for the county. Chair, if we may, our staff's prepared to go through the agenda, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to remind the Budget Committee members, and by the way, thank you for all attending, even Jan, you're on remotely. I appreciate everyone's attendance. Paul will be here in a minute. He's on a really important meeting right now, and he can do catch up just fine. Today, the deliberations revolve around the current year's budget. And you all probably heard about the new budgets coming in up for the next fiscal year. And if any of the budget members on this committee receive a phone call from maybe somebody who was inadvertently pitching for funding of their particular pet project or department or division or project, if you would kindly refer to them, gee, I don't know, could you please take your concerns to Gary Schmidt, our administrator? I think that's easy. And you don't want to be responsible for saying something that we don't know about. You don't want to be responsible for giving somebody information that may not be vetted correctly. So with that in mind, Gary, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Also, we don't want you to inadvertently violate Oregon budget law, which is also why we ask you to do that. All right, so I'm going to ask Elizabeth Comfort and Sandra Montoya. They will lead the meeting today, and we'll have a good discussion. So please go ahead, Elizabeth and Sandra.
Okay, so thank you again, Sandra Montoya. The first item we have is the approval of the minutes for May 24th, I believe. So Chair, if you could request a vote on that, that would be great.
I assume folks have read the minutes, and I will entertain a motion.
So moved to accept.
I'll second that.
Member Wilda Parks has moved to approve the Budget Committee meeting minutes from May 24, 2022, and Kenneth Cernak has seconded the motion. Are there any corrections, additions that need to be made? Hearing none. Tony, would you please call the poll?
Commissioner Shull. Aye. Mr. Rhodes. Aye. Ms. Parks.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Mr. Cernak.
Aye.
Mr. Karn.
Aye.
Ms. Lee. Chair Smith.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Gary, you're up.
It's a dramatic pause. Sorry about
Yeah.
that, Commissioners. Go ahead, Sandra.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next item, item number 2, is just an overview of the 23-24 budget process. We, the internal staff, kicked off the budget process on January 18th. At that point, just as we do every year, we provide overview, just general instructions on how this planning year will go. It sort of sets the tone for the budget and identifies some of the hurdles or the challenges, and also highlights some of the good things that we've got going on in the county. And for 23-24, I just wanted to go over some of those large items that we've reminded folks about, things like making sure that budgets are aligned to the BCC priority areas and the strategic goals. We do understand that you have a planning session coming up in February, and so we did encourage departments, try and stay flexible because the board will be reviewing those priorities, and then we'll communicate that. The other is prioritizing mandated services and considering effective alternatives while balancing workloads, because we do know that as times get leaner, the tendency is to put more work on the staff that's existing, and we want to be really careful for that because we've been doing that for a couple of years. So that was the message there. We also want to seek to maximize revenue to reduce the need for general fund support. So we, with the courthouse decision to build a couple of months ago, we know that we've got those large looming payments that will be starting in a few years. We're trying to make capacity now within our existing budget, and so the message to departments is try and maximize revenue to reduce the need for general fund support. We're asking departments also to consider the elimination of long-term vacancies and just making good revenue estimates and also expenditure estimates. So just at a very high level, those are some of the things that we encourage departments to do. We will be going over the budget calendar in a few minutes, and so we'll start to talk about how those things fold in and timing. So is there any questions?
Any questions for Sandra Montoya, our budget manager? Nope. And you know what? Just raise your hand or raise your card, and
Yeah,
if I don't see you, wave, because I probably won't see you. Go ahead, Sandra.
Okay, so the next large item that I want to make sure we spend time on is the forecast. And so that, if I can have you turn your packet pages, it should be page 8 in your packets. And obviously, there's lots of detail that lives behind this spreadsheet, but this is just a summary of the categories that we have. This is the general fund forecast. A few years ago, it just used to be a 5-year forecast. And when we started the discussions of the courthouse, what we did is we extended the forecast period out through the end of that last payment for the courthouse, which currently it drops off in 55, 56. And so what you see on this forecast page is this forecast extended out through 56, 57, which allows us to see how those costs escalate, and then 56, 57, they just drop off. That is the final payment of the courthouse taking place. And so what we have done here in the forecast is we take the current year that we're in, so that is forecast year 1, and it's fiscal year 22, 23. We use the budget in this column, and then using trending and normal escalators, we apply those across revenue and across expenses to get to, first of all, an operating budget. So the first thing is that we want the operating budget to remain balanced, and then I want to call attention, so that gets you that net operating income or loss, and you'll see that for the first 5 years, the forecast, that remains in balance. So when we refer to a sustainable budget, we are talking about that net operating income. That's that subtotal that you see. And so long as that is in the black, that's what we refer to as a sustainable budget. Incoming revenue is being met with incoming, or is being used by incoming expenses. Then below that, you'll see that we start to layer in special projects. And that's when things start to turn around. As we're layering in special projects, and we've got some of those listed, and obviously it's not everything, but we have tried to group in large categories. But you can see that then when we go to the subtotal that says revenue less expenses, we go to the red. And that is because we don't have enough funds in our existing budget to extend to all of those special projects. And so then the next exercise we do is we start to look at what will it take in reductions to bring that red line back to black. And what we have calculated out, and let me stop here, the next exercise, along with looking at the reductions that are needed, we are continually trying to balance those last two rows that say contingency and reserve requirements, and then fund balance after the reserve requirements. We're trying to balance those two. We never want to violate our own policies for contingency and reserves. We want to maintain that, and we want to maintain our AAA rating, bond rating that is, and then we want to make sure that we have a cushion for things that are coming. That last line is available for special projects, and you'll see that over the next couple of years, over the next 30 years, we will start to dip into that to the point that by fiscal year 54, 55, that goes into the negative. And so that is a very crucial year that we are trying to balance now. But you can see, we've got lots of lead time before we get to fiscal year 54, 55. But those are the things that we're trying to do. And so keeping all of that in mind, what we have calculated is that we need 15 million in reductions in this next year, fiscal year 23, 24, in order to do a smoother glide path for the next 30 years of the courthouse. So with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to let you ask me questions, please.
We'll open it up to questions. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, apologize for being a few minutes late. My last meeting went a little bit long. My question, Sandra, is if what I'm looking at here on revenue less expenses, just want to confirm that that's without the $15 million reduction?
Correct. That is before the $15 million reduction.
Okay, so, okay, and we're obviously going to make reductions. And the other thing I want to just say is that if we cut $1 million a year of ongoing expenses, right? Not one time, but ongoing expenses, that across the line goes for years out. I mean, my point being is that it's the ongoing that I'm putting my emphasis and focus on and in the forecast. So that pays dividends. So these totals that are in red, if we cut $1 million a year in operating funds ongoing, that reduces every year $1 million, and then multiply that add every year onward. So 35 years from now, that's $35 million in today's funds.
Correct. That is correct.
Great, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Wilda Parks.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Paul. I kind of understand that. I have to admit, I'm a little not clear, not sure. So the 15 million that shows across the board over the next 40 years, is that every year there's going to be an additional 15 million removed from the budget? That's what I'm not quite,
No.
it's just not quite working in my head. I'm sorry.
No, so the 15 million is, if we did it all today, or in fiscal year 23, 24, we would maintain that consistently. So that's
Okay.
15 million off of the base.
Right.
And it would carry forward for the next 30 years.
And then adding to that, what Commissioner Savas mentioned is even if there was an additional or part of, $1 million, it's going to aggregate over time and benefit us to the greater degree. Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
For now. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes. It was mentioned earlier that one of the things that we're looking at to balance this budget, make ends meet, is to maximize revenue to reduce pressure and support from the general fund. But on that idea, I would think that our departments have very limited ability to maximize revenue. I mean, for example, the planning department has only got so much ability to generate revenue based on applications that come in. As we look at encouraging maximizing revenue, we also need to look at what we're going to do in reducing the cost of government, because one of our big expenditures is personnel, and for every dollar of personnel pay that goes out, we have to send out 25 cents to PERS. So we need to look at both sides to make this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Anyone else like to make a comment at this point?
I've got a quick question.
Yes, Kenneth Sternot, go
Are we
ahead.
planning for fairly even across the board, or
Kevin, we are not discussing the future budget.
Okay.
We are concerned of the forecast going forward. Thank you for your question, though.
Well, I'm not sure I understood his question, so.
Well, he wanted to know what we were planning for the future.
Just if there was thoughts about trying to be fairly even or targeting, not specifics, but just an overall
Gary?
approach.
Yes, I'll answer that. The answer is no. It would be an 8.5% cut for every single office and department if it was equally shared. And based on my understanding of the board's priorities, that would not be acceptable. So it is not going to be across the board. It's going to be equitable, if I'm using the term correctly. Some will take more, some will take less.
So as you remember my opening remarks I made today, this discussion revolves around the current year's budget. We have not delved into our budget meetings for the next coming budget. Thank you very much. Up next.
Okay, so actually, if you don't have any other questions on the forecast, that is the majority of today's presentation. We can continue to go through the rest of the packet, but we actually believe that you would have more questions and want to delve in deeper into this.
Gary.
If I may, Sandra, if we could talk a little bit about it. I think we've done some really good financial work here, planning, thanks to the Board of Commissioners and our staff. On the forecast in particular, that final line, fund balance net of reserve requirements. I really want to draw attention to that, and I'll just quickly speak to it, but Sandra, please tell more. So above that, you see our contingency and reserves are fully funded for 30 years. We never dip into that. And after the contingency and reserves are placed, there's still a balance of unspent general fund every year between 50 to 60 million, which we carry over to the following year. But that is a healthy balance, and that's what's going to help us pay for the courthouse, as well as other priorities you may come up with, commissioners. You know what they are. So that's a good thing. We still have to make the reductions of 15 million, but the healthy carryover net of reserve requirements, that bottom line is really positive. And I know you know it, but I want to draw that to your attention. Do you want to correct anything I've said, Sandra?
I do. So the only correction that I would make is those 2 years let me look at the fiscal year here. In fiscal year 54-55 and 55-56, we do go in the red. That red would have to come from the reserves. So we would eat into the line above in order to make ends meet in those 2 fiscal years. So, but that is not a bad place to be, because the reserves are also to be used for some of those special projects, if that is what you deem. So
I don't
that is
think most of
completely-
us will be here in the year 2054, although I do have intentions, but you know, I just don't think the math is going to work out for me.
Okay.
I'm going to still be
West?
here. I'm going to still be here.
You're gonna still be
Yeah,
here.
I'm the baby of the group.
Yeah, Kenneth?
Well, I'm right there with you.
Okay.
Me and Kenneth, we're going to be here.
You two worry about the year 2054. Thank you for that. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Well, I'm trying to keep my diet of spinach daily as best as possible, so we'll see how it works out. I
Okay.
told my doctor I'll be the lab rat for eating greens, so I've been
Okay.
eating greens all my whole life. So what I wanted to jump to, if we're ready, because I know, Sandra, you said we're near done, but I want to talk about the overtime, the page you have here on overtime. And, when I look at that, it's a lot of money. It's something that's been, I won't say haunting us, but I would like to, it's more of a request, not for today, but for the future, for the near future here, when we have the budget. I would like to get a breakdown the word, Kenny, I would use is we're going to be surgical, right? So in that effort, in that thought process, as we're trying to be surgical, to find out what is driving, what program or what issue is driving, in breaking down that, drilling down another layer or two, what's driving the overtime? Is it, for example, if the sheriff's office, has a lot of overtime, and let's say we've discovered that 50% of that overtime is due to homeless or houseless type situations or people with mental health issues, and we were to get a, investment in this region for mental health in the state, they are doing something that really law enforcement really did anticipate at this magnitude that we're experiencing today. So it's really unfair. Is there a way maybe we can offset that burden with services, whether state funded or local funded, to bring that down? And again, if that results in $1 million or $2 million savings, to my earlier point, that helps us in the aggregate all the way along and even goes out to 55, 56, right? So those are the things beyond the 15 million that maybe were anticipated, but maybe it is part of the 15 million that we do. So just want to throw that out. I'd like to get a greater level of detail from each department. What drove that? What drives that? And if that's 4 or 5 things, please list for every department listed here, what that is. Not today, but for our next budget meeting.
Okay? Yes, Wilda.
That kind of ties in with what I've been thinking about, Paul, in some ways, and I appreciate that. I was wondering if there was something that could be quickly and easily prepared for us that said, a year ago, October, November, December, the overtime was this, and now it's this, and see where those collate. Because, we've had a lot of things happen. You got a lot of people that aren't working anymore. You got a lot of retirees. You got COVID in the middle of all of that. You got all those other factors. So on not the whole year, but the partial year-to-year basis, it would be interesting for me. I don't know about others. If it's not, then that's fine. But to see how those are similar or different or whatever. And then add to that what's driving it as much as we could figure out. And it might not be able to. I mean, with H3S, it's probably affordable housing and housing the unhoused and that type of thing. But, not knowing that, it's hard to figure out how to plan for that. So, thank you.
Okay, the second page after. Yeah, I know. Just a minute, Paul. The budget calendar, we got ahead of ourselves, and I know you want to talk about overtime. But do we want to go in the order of the packet, or is that important?
I was just trying to flag that Commissioner West had his card up.
Okay, and thank you. Would you please hold? So if we can go in order, do we want to take a look, Gary, at the budget planning calendar? Are these dates acceptable to folks?
Yes, if we may go over the calendar, and then we're open to any questions,
And then we'll
comments you have.
talk about Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner West or whomever. So have we all had an opportunity to look over the budget calendar?
Yeah. Calendar looks good, but my question is, on the 26th of April when we meet, will we receive our budget books then and be able to have a couple of weeks, 3 weeks actually, to look at it and get questions back, or does that come later? I can't remember what the timing on that is.
Sandra will answer.
Member Parks, the books will be distributed. Currently, we have it May 10th or 11th.
Okay.
So the hope is to give you at least a week or a little bit more. But I can tell you that this calendar, while we want you to review it and approve it, it is subject to change. Because even now, we're bumping up against some of these dates.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So
And
May
I'll-
10th to 11th is when the budget books should be delivered. Yes.
Yes, Chair Smith, I wanted to add that the April 26th Budget Committee meeting, that's our regular quarterly meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that.
So the new budget will not be discussed then either. Thank you very much. Now, we can go to the overtime. Commissioner West, did you have a comment?
Yeah, not specifically about overtime. It's
That's right.
It's a little bit maybe about the importance of definitions, and which can also set up our goals, right? Like our overarching goals. I heard the term today of sustainable budget. And what does that specifically mean to us versus a stable budget? What does that specifically mean? You hear these different terms about budgets and their goals. As we journey into this endeavor together, I think it's important that we have a strong understanding about that framework.
Okay. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, just one other term on that note is structurally sound.
Structurally sound, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we had a distinction between sustainable and structurally sound. And structurally sound being something that's more 5 years or more out, correct? That it's sustainable over a longer period of time, as I understand it.
I don't know
Is that fair, Sandra?
I think we need to define, if we're going to use these terms, I think it's obvious what sustainability is. I think affordability is another one, but structurally sound, who defines that, Paul?
No,
Or
you
Sonia?
can look it up you look up the definition right now, and I think that's pretty much what it infers.
Industry-wide.
Yeah.
And I can bring it back, because I don't have a definition for you today. So I can look and see if it's in Oregon budget law. The sustainable budget, I don't know that that is in Oregon budget law, but I know over the last decade or more, that is a term that I've heard used in many different locations. So I've freely used it, and I think it's an easy to envision term.
Yeah, so are we sustainable for the next 3 years? Just 1 year are we looking good, or is it 5 years? Like, what does sustainable mean, and how sound does that make us going to the future? Because we're talking out to where I will still be on the commission in the year 54. I'm just kidding. But we're forecasting really far out here. We're being kind of like, what's the vision moving forward? So I would just like to understand what that looks like for us, and what are our goals for sustainability over a longer period of time in the future of the county.
Tony has his card up over there, Chair.
Tony?
Ms. Lee?
Yes, thank you. In looking at the vacancies, which are over $8 million, it seems that a lot of this overtime might be a problematic result of not having the hirings accomplished. So I would appreciate if staff could speak a little more to that. But I also had a question about the budget committee meeting. Would the Monday meeting be the same as it has in the past with just specific agencies and not the full budget committee? And I also want to apologize for not being there. I have to be at a hearing online in a half hour. So, sorry.
Thank you, Jan, for those comments. Gary?
So for today, Budget Committee, I'm asking you to please hold that entire week of May 22nd to May 25th. I cannot confirm, normally in the past, you've started Tuesday, but that may change this year. There's a lot for you to talk about. So for now, would you just please hold Monday, May 22nd through Thursday, May 25th? We'll have more clarity for you in the coming weeks.
So Gary, I'm going to make a recommendation now, and it's nothing to be voted on. I'm going to suggest we start on Monday and factor in the extra day, because we're up against a 3-day weekend, and some people want to take a 4-day weekend for staff. I know commissioners are going to be tired. We're going to be probably really worn out by the time we get to that week. So I'm going to ask that we're going to massage the calendar a little bit with an early start on Monday, and then we'll take a look at the end of the week. If we don't finish deliberations by the end of the week, I'm going to suggest we do not work into the holiday weekend. We come back the next week on another day with fresh eyes and finish it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, further questions? Jan Lee. She had some questions.
Yeah, the unfilled vacancies versus overtime. I mean, I have an opinion, but do you want to, Sandra or Elizabeth, start? Or I could, you tell me.
I think that is a very clear reason or justification for overtime and if you look at the vacancies, departments with higher vacancies have higher overtime. And it's just trying to fill the needs with the existing staff. And so that's not in all cases, but there is a very close correlation.
Okay,
And we can certainly bring that report back to you so you can see it combined.
Gary, did we answer all of Jan's questions?
She did. I would also add, I mean, if you look at the page 8, the overtime grid, I mean, obviously our sheriff's office has the most. But the other times, I mean, when there was, I'm looking at February 2022, that's when we had the weather issues, H3S overtime went up because they helped support the warming shelters, right? And the same in July 2022, we had the heat issues. That's why H3S staff overtime went up. So a lot of it is you can base it on events that are out of our control. And so we put all hands on deck to support those employees, and they deserve to get paid regular time as well as overtime. So yes, vacancies, the number of staff we have available, and then circumstances out of our control, our staff step forward, and they need to be paid for that.
Yeah, and we do expect the staff to rise to the occasion, and there's foreseen events that you just, for instance, we cannot sit at this dais and make a policy, oh, nobody will be using overtime. That's just not sustainable, nor is it realistic for the service delivery that we offer our citizens. Commissioner West.
One common issue with any large employer or organization is incremental overtime, where, oops, I didn't pay attention to the clock and I clocked out 15 minutes late. That adds up, even 30 minutes, 15 minutes late. I came in a little bit early, or, and that kind of incremental overtime is not the same as we don't have enough sheriffs to cover this area, so you have to work 2 extra shifts this week just to have basic coverage, or that we have a heat dome, or, we had the giant frost and frozen rain that took over everything and broke all the trees, or whatever, all those big catastrophic issues that will arise, and many of our staff are obligated, not just morally, but by their job duties to show up anyways and put in those hours. Incremental overtime is not that, and so I don't know what our policy is around that, or how much of this overtime is really 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and incremental, and unnecessary, and can be shaved off.
Gary, has that ever been discussed at the department level?
Not recently, no. I mean, all overtime is approved by management, so employees don't get to decide, management gets to decide. So it's very carefully managed in all departments, including our sheriff's office. But that's a good question. I'll have to kind of see if that may be an underlying factor.
That is an interesting thought. I'm going to go to Commissioner Savas, because I know you have comments and questions.
She's reading me. So, Commissioner West, I got talking to a friend of mine, and because he heard your statement about the 14-hour ride-along.
Yes.
And he said, was there overtime in that? Why? What happened? So I'm not here to ask you the question.
I'll tell you, yeah.
Yeah, but that certainly wasn't a clock in, clock out issue, right?
We barely even, like I said, I think that speaks to this. I did a 14-hour ride-along, which is insane. But I did it in the busiest part of Clackamas County with one of our deputies, who was stellar and amazing to watch them work. Not just the one I was with, but the other ones we interacted with. But normally a shift is 10 hours. That's a standard 4 10-hour shifts for a deputy. They needed him to also help and provide coverage for, see if I get my acronyms right, NLP program that we're in, the Neighborhood Livability Project, which is wildly successful. That's a whole nother topic, but we've been talking about that too. And so he clocked on another 4 hours so they could have coverage to make sure that they were checking in and doing proactive policing, specifically on properties that are tied to criminality and specific illegal drug usage and things like that are hubs of issues within Clackamas County. So he had to clock on an additional another 4 hours. So I was on the clock with him basically from like around, I think somewhere around 10 a.m. to about midnight before I got back to my car. The moment we tried to stop and get a burrito, like on the side of the road at one of the little stands for lunch, 4 times, get back in the car, we got to go to another call. Okay, are we going to eat yet? Get back in the car. We're going to do it. We have another emergency to deal with. And then often we would see all these crimes pop up, and like, yeah, we're prioritizing what we have to deal with right now. That will never have an officer show up or deputy show up to, because we just don't have the coverage, because Dick's Sporting Goods got hit like 15 times. Macy's, over, like the mall was just exploding with theft all over. But we couldn't even respond to those calls, even though we all know that you can't have a strong civil society if it's overtaken by theft of any kind. It's essential for strong civil society to have that rule of law respected and honored. But all of them working overtime at the highest level of professionalism, working with amazing critical thinking skills, assessment skills, prioritization, treating people with dignity, knowing when to escalate, not to escalate. It was like this tapestry of, it was this amazing tapestry, just kind of watching them interact and do that work together. And we demand perfection of them. Why? Because people's lives are at stake. But they do not have enough deputies. So their overtime issue is for real and it's expensive because they just don't have enough deputies, period, to have the appropriate coverage that's the bare minimum. But that's different than what happens in large organizations because small details like incremental overtime, I know we even deal with it in the hospital systems, I could be like, it's different between like, I couldn't get out of that patient's room, I couldn't get off the floor, versus, I stayed a little extra because I didn't manage my time and I needed 15 extra minutes to chart. That's a different conversation with management within the hospital systems where I'm accustomed to working. But this is a large organization too, and you can get caught up in things, but there should be a strict policy about protecting the budgets and not having unnecessary expense with employment with incremental overtime. So what does that look like for us? And not all overtime, as we talked about, is the same.
Thank you, Ben. Ms. Savas? Continue, sir.
Yep, thank you.
Oh.
Yep,
Oh.
that concludes that's all I wanted to just raise.
Okay,
yeah.
good. All righty. Any other questions or comments from any of our Budget Committee members at this point? Gary, what's next?
That is the end of our agenda. So again, there were a lot of handouts in the packet of, overtime, vacancy rates. If there's any other questions you may have about the current budget.
I'd like to turn to page 10. It's the FTE vacancy salary savings. Sandra, can you explain this chart to us, please?
Sure, let me get to it.
Oh, yeah, please talk directly into your microphone. You have
Okay.
such a wonderful voice, but it's a little bit soft.
And okay, I'll
There
try.
you go.
Is that better? Thank you. Okay, so this is an attempt at us identifying filled positions, vacant positions by department, giving you a percentage rate, and then identifying the value of those savings. And I need to point out that year-to-date salary savings is our calculation back into that salary savings, because we don't actually go back and calculate like, position A is worth this much money and that's the one that's vacant. We don't go down to that position level to identify the actual savings. So it's just a calculation, a percentage calculation.
So it's an estimation.
Absolutely.
Well, certainly these departments know exactly what vacant positions are open and the rate they pay. So why do we have an estimation, Gary, yet the departments know exactly? I'm assuming.
Or departments know, yes.
Okay, so why is this an estimation and not an actual?
I think that the best answer is because when we post payroll, we post it at the totals. It's not at that position level that we get it in our reports. So it would require a lot more analysis at exact position levels in order, so we could get it. It's not for this analysis. This is a higher level analysis that's just more with rounded figures.
Gary?
We can go as deep as you want, so we're happy to pull those numbers for you.
Well, okay, Elizabeth.
This is Elizabeth. I just might add that when the position is vacant, we don't know who's going to fill the position, what skill level, and we have a range with qualifications. So we're always going to be estimating until that position is filled with that exact skilled employee. And then you have medical, you have benefits on top of that. So this average, I would say, is a good way to look at the value of that vacancy.
Okay.
So I think we're doing the best that we can with it being vacant.
For instance, you have a vacancy, the job position, let's say, I'm pulling numbers out of the air. The salary range is $27 an hour to $33 an hour, depending on experience, education, blah, blah, blah. So the person comes in for an interview, we may be thinking that that policy position, or that position is 27, but actually get hired at 33. And so you take the average across the board of all positions. Okay. That makes sense now. Any further questions on that? Gary?
All right, if there are no further questions, that is the end of the staff presentation today and the end of your meeting.
Do we have any further questions about our next board meeting, and when is that?
April 26th.
April 26th. We will meet again April 26. Going once.
And that's for the current budget.
For the current budget. And I'm just going to say, we don't know what next year's budget is yet. The commissioners have not even taken a deep dive to know what's in it or what's not in it. That's going to be coming soon, and there's still much work being done on this. And I think we all have an opinion on how it's going to roll out, but until decisions are made, I think there is some angst in the county, in our departments, and with our citizens. I just want to say something based on my experience. I used to work at the Bonneville Power Administration as a legal rights reviewer, and I was in the legal department. And we went through a RIF. It's called a reduction in force, because Bonneville Power in the late 80s had to cut back positions. And it took them a year to get there. And every day I would hear something new about the budget, because people were worried that they were going to lose their jobs. And for that year, probably very little of what I heard was actually the truth. So I just want to be mindful, and I want our citizens to know, I want our employees to know, I really feel some of the angst, and I know our board members do, and I know there's a lot of information being circulated out there, but everybody just needs to either discard what you hear until the actual numbers come out and just show up and be the best we can, because I had to go through that, and I know it's not fun. I just want to let you all know that. I'm not going to tell you what the result of my employment was, or maybe I should. Yeah, I was laid off. I was laid off, and it felt very bad. But, you know, it was a new start in my life for me. And I look back on that job as a huge learning experience. My reaction to that was a huge learning experience where I grew. And I'm not saying people are going to be laid off their jobs, but we all make it, and you know, God takes care of us all. So with that in mind, I think, seeing no further business before this budget committee, we are adjourned.
Thank you.